Hello! This is my first interview on Learning and Unlearning. I want to do one probably once a month, but don't count on it being a certain week of the month. And my first interview is with my friend Cindy, and she is like a goddess of wisdom. We always have the best talks, and she gives this great advice. She is so pointed with her questions. She is completely open to talking about pretty much anything. She is 100% accepting of everybody's life situations, and yet it doesn't feel like a gentle talk. It feels like it's sharpening you to be better. And she is gracious enough to let me interview her, and whenever we talk, she is gracious enough to tell me that she gains perspective from what I say too, even though she is much wiser than me. And so, without further ado, here's Cindy riding in her camper van and me at home on Zoom. Let's do it. Okay. Well, it was so funny when you said that you were gonna obsess over the questions, but you only had less than 24 hours. So did you obsess over them? Did you talk to Jonathan about them?
I actually did not. In fact, we were just heading in to spend an evening with Esther and Ryan and Pepper. And I said to Esther, read this first part. You're going to be so humored. And as she was reading them, your questions came in. And then we ended up staying there much later than anticipated last night. And this morning we got up and hopped in the camper and left. So I was actually just saying to Jonathan, I thought I was going to have time to obsess over these questions, but I did not. And I guess that's a great segue into COVID lockdown and what happens when you have too much time on your hands. You can obsess over a lot of things.
Oh, yeah, like things that your partner does, things that your husband does, or yeah, there have been, I had a lot of time to think, especially when I wasn't physically going to work, and I liked it. Actually, my last episode is about that. It's about protecting your time after COVID is over and the world's trying to open up 100%, and I don't want to do that. Like, I don't want to go back to the busyness that I had before. But
yeah,
then
for sure.
we could talk about relationships though. Like when you were initially in lockdown, were you in Vermont or were you in Georgia?
We were actually just leaving Florida in the camper and heading to Georgia. In fact, we were truly thrown, if you will, out of the Keys. That morning that we left was the final day that people could get onto the Keys. So we had a choice to either stay for 30 days or longer and become long-term campers or go.
Wow. Even if you already worked from home, will you tell me what a struggle was for you when you were trying to work hours and after work hours and your home office?
There's actually some pretty good information out there about some people find it extremely stressful when a larger corporate employer chooses to shut down the availability to the work network certain hours. Some people are very, very emotionally frustrated by that, but I think we all recognize there has to be boundaries and moderation in everything that we do. I guess that's kind of my, mantra, if you will. You just can't work all the time.
No, you can't. I was positively affected by not having to commute. I like driving, but for some reason in the last couple years, it just makes me anxious. And I used to think that I was anxious about the future and thinking about where I was going. Because sometimes, especially in my personality, I might think ahead to where I'm going, and you imagine the social scenario, and you're like, oh, maybe it'll go this way, maybe it'll go that way. But with some talking to my counselor, actually, I realized that I wasn't actually, I always found myself anxious in the car, and I was trying to figure out why and blame it on the social situation I was driving to. And then I realized talking to her that I was just anxious in the car. It, I was not worried about what was going to happen when I met up with my friends or coworkers or whoever. And I don't know why I'm anxious in the car, but when I didn't have to drive to work anymore, I was decreasing my anxiety level by a lot. So that was nice.
Right. Oh, yeah.
I guess I was lucky enough to spend more time with Ian while I was quarantined. And and then I had the summer where I wasn't working, and I didn't have the summer job I had the summer before. And I mean, I kept hearing people were talking about how their relationships were in crucibles, and that spending extra time with somebody who you're not used to spending your whole day with, any family member or whatever, uh, people were getting divorced, or it was like a make it or break it moment.
Sure.
And I mean, I guess I heard about a couple of those, and you made a face. What? You don't believe that?
No, I'm humored by it, sadly.
Oh, well, yeah. Well, I did have some struggles with Ian, and it was, I don't know if it was like we didn't have anything else to think about,
Right.
but there were things that would bother me about him, just little habits where he'll open a package of something and he leaves the lid that he ripped off, like it's trash, and so he leaves trash around. And I started nitpicking that, and I couldn't figure out how can this not be a big deal, or how can I approach this with love. Like I thought my way all around it, trying to figure out,
I'm sure.
analyzing the crap out of it, just wondering how can I be better about this, or when is this not gonna bother me? Yeah. So do you have any advice about those little things that you, if you start to notice them, or if you've always noticed them, what's your advice for somebody who doesn't want to nag their partner about stupid stuff, but it still bothers you
Right.
inside?
Yeah. Well, I guess I would have two different responses depending on, honestly, whether this is um, what you would call a faith-driven perspective or a secular-driven podcast.
Let's do both.
So I think from a faith-driven, there needs to be this recognition that the relationship is working as it is intended to be. And that whole, going back to my mother, I'm sure I've told you this one, the relationship is never 50-50. You're not always giving the same exact amount. Sometimes you're giving more, sometimes you're giving less. And in those sort of, if you will, nitpicky moments, just step up to the plate, repeat on that. But I think it is very, very easy for, again, call it what you want. Everybody has a different perspective on it. But for me, it's just anytime we have good relationships, in my opinion, the devil is right there waiting to turn it nasty, because he just loves to see us in pain. Mm-hmm. And so those little things, and it happens to me, and I know it happens to Jonathan, you can get those little things under your skin, if you will, that just so don't matter. And they can destroy a relationship. I guess that would be my one view, depending on whom I was speaking with, because as you know, I'm not one to push a Christian perspective on someone who doesn't have that faith. There's no point for either of you to try to do that.
Yeah.
In my opinion, I think on a very secular level, it's simply a matter of, you know what, choose your battles.
Mm-hmm.
Choose your battles, or be that person that doesn't choose your battles and everything is a battle, but recognize it's going to affect your relationship. And I'm hardly a pushover. I mean, you can ask Jonathan that, but there are stupid little things that he does that bother me. I'm hopeful that I don't make a fuss of them. I know he certainly doesn't for me. And I mean, nobody likes a nag.
Yeah.
You know?
Right. And nobody wants to be one either.
No.
I did talk about this before, because to stick with my example from earlier, I found that I would just throw away the trash that Ian had left around. And then when he was present, I could point it out and just be like, oh, there's that thing. And then he would pick it up and throw it away. And so then if he ever pointed out that I was sort of a nag, I'm like, I show you 1/3 of the trash you leave around. Like, I don't want to be a nag. 2/3 of the time I keep my mouth shut and take care of it. But I guess it's just different perspectives that people have. And he doesn't know what I'm doing when he's not around.
Right. Now, if he's just messy and that's frustrating to you, I mean, or, let's put it in a more general context and in the scope of this podcast. Yeah, if you have somebody that's just consistently doing something on a much broader level that's frustrating you, naturally when you're together 24/7, it's just going to compound it that much more. So you can see where when there are some underlying issues that haven't been addressed and all of a sudden you're home constantly, it's going to be a real problem.
Right. Well, thankfully this wasn't. And I am thankful that in this relationship, I feel like your mother said, there are times when he is pulling a higher percent than me. And
right.
I definitely appreciate that. And there are times when he's very emotionally supportive. How can a partner actively address their own weaknesses? It's like, I want to, but I don't know how. And the obvious answer, I think, is for your partner to help point it out, and then you listen and take the constructive criticism. But if I was trying to work on it, not just when it pops up, then how can I do that?
Right. Well, I do think you have to be careful though, and again, on both sides of the coin, whichever discussion you're having, the secular versus the faith. I have seen many relationships where you just don't have the forthrightness and the honesty to even be able to approach it. So that's probably honestly the first filter is, I mean, look deep. Do you have a partner that you can trust to give you accurate perspectives?
Mm-hmm.
That's the whole story of the lamplighter. I don't know if you've heard of that. And the husband that just kept dimming the light on his wife, and she would say, I think it's getting darker. He'd say, no, it's not. I mean, if you're just dealing with a partner that's not
gaslighting you,
adequate, right, then I've never been a fan of the people that are telling a partner on either side, male or female, oh, you need to listen, when it's like, no, the guy's a schmuck. Why would you listen to him? So I guess I would need to put that out on the table first. Now, if you're at a point where yeah, this is a person who is worthy of me listening to, that's a really tough one. Jonathan and I tease each other about, we're going to sanctify one, and I'm just trying to sanctify you. The other one laughs. I self-awareness, of course, is the hardest part. You have to finally, truly, deeply recognize that it's a problem before you're going to fix it. I mean, he can point it out as often as you want, but you've, it's, for Jonathan and I, it's always a struggle with eating. I mean, we can lose weight. We're intelligent. We know how to lose weight, but we just simply need to decide we're going to lose the weight. So whatever that piece is, that you're struggling with, like at this point, enough. I would gather from what you're saying, you love Ian and trust his opinions enough. Like, are you going to fix it or not? Those are the easy ones. When there's a clear weakness and you can recognize it is, and he is willing to share with you that it is, and vice versa, he's got his weaknesses too. In my opinion, those are the real easy ones, if you will. The hard ones are when you're both right. Maybe it's not a weakness. Maybe it's simply a character trait that you have, and that he's right. It's a flaw, if you will, but it's also very much just who you are. And Jonathan and I, we've started talking to our kids more and more about when one person is clearly right and you love each other and you're willing to communicate through it, and there are thousands of communication tools out there to work through. Those are the easy ones. The problem is, what if you're both right, but you feel differently? Those are the tough ones. Or what if there is no good answer? What if both of your answers are not great? How do you work through those? I mean, that may be part of a stumbling block for people. Again, if you're in that good committed relationship, the clear faults and the clear weaknesses should, in quotes, be just something that you're ready to deal with. Mm-hmm. How you deal with that, I don't know. You know me, I'm the first to say I'm not a counselor. Go to a counselor, have them help you figure it out.
It's simple, but it's hard on the inside, because for me, I think I have a lot of shame about if I did something incorrectly, and he doesn't have that. Like, he doesn't have shame about most anything, and I really admire that. It's like, in other situations, I'm worrying about what other people think, and sometimes I'm making decisions based on what I think others are thinking, and he's like, who gives a bleep? Like,
right.
That's not important. And so, yeah, I mean, I've learned a lot from him too. And
I just read an interesting article, and it was suggesting that those of us as parents who have raised our children to be very self-confident, which I think is something that your parents would have certainly found important, there tends to be a pretty big gap in not having self-compassion. And so anytime that a person who's self-confident feels that they've made a mistake, feels that they've done something incorrectly, it tends to come out in in aggressive, bullyish ways. That was super interesting. And versus the self-compassionate person is just somebody who can, you know what, I made a mistake, but I'm still okay. Mm-hmm. Versus that self-confident person really struggles with the mistakes they make.
Right. Well, because somehow your achievements got tied to your worth.
Right. Right. Jonathan made a comment to me recently, and honestly, I was kind of floored, but it's stuck with me. Sometimes in the way that I speak, which is that black and white, there are plenty of times where I'm just speaking, I'm just thinking, I'm talking through an idea, but the way that I communicate it, it very much sounds like this is the way it needs to be done. So that was really interesting for me in the particular instance, which is irrelevant. I was truly blathering. So I guess that's another thought that some people may not consider is your minds may be on the same wavelength, but it's just the way that you're saying it, particularly if you're a real black and white person. You're delivering a message that sounds much more like, you used the word stubborn before. much more kind of stubborn and know-it-all than you really intending it to be.
Yeah, I probably make that mistake too. But then does he say, once you explain, I was just blathering and I didn't mean it has to be like that. I was just thinking and talking. Does he let it go? Or do you need to work on your tone?
No, I think at this point we are able to let it go, but that's, I mean, frankly, 2 divorces and, 50 years of wisdom, more on his part, I guess, than me. I feel like he's got a lot more, he's just developed a lot more quiet wisdom than I have. I still tend to prattle on a bit more. So yeah, I think we're at the point where these things wash away quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a pretty lofty goal to get to in a relationship. Again, I think that's decades of not just being in a relationship, but just, if you will, smoothing the edges of humanhood.
I like that. Is that the title of the show?
There we go. That's right.
So when you're saying, I agree with you, by the way, about roommates and married couples, mother-in-laws. I think it works. Mothers-in-law, I should say. I think it's true that whatever works is fine, or it's right for them. Did you have to talk about dispersing the work though? Do you have to talk about it, or does it just naturally happen a certain way? And it's like, well, we do it this way and neither of us is bothered by it, so we'll keep doing it this way? Or do you say, I like gardening, I'm going to mow the lawn, and you like cooking, you're going to cook, or whatever? Did you have to talk about it? Do you think most people do?
Oh, I think it's extremely important from all of my experiences, from my first marriage, from the many relationships, that people have talked to me about over the years. I think it's critical, and honestly, I think it's one of those that can break a relationship pretty easily, particularly if you've got sort of the workhorse, and that doesn't mean on the career side, but within the home. You've got that one person that's just kind of powering through all the chores. I think the other dynamic I've seen, and this is one of those, man, if you could sort of go through a checklist of, pre-relationship flight takeoff checklist, I think recognizing, if you're a person that just naturally craves a house that's really, really clean and neat, why would you marry a slob? Like, why make life difficult?
Right. It's your fault you fell in love with a slob.
But it's going to drive you crazy for the rest of both of your lives. Like, why? I don't know. Again, that's just probably a slightly goofy take. Yeah, Jonathan and I do not struggle over chores because we have very similar thoughts on what a house should look like. So it makes it very simple. That was not the case in my first marriage. And it was a hardship. Certainly, it wasn't a deal breaker, and we could have worked through it if either of us had the ability to do so. But a lot of the household details are very easy for us because we're very compatible with that.
Okay, right. And maybe that's rare, and I don't, it's none of my business if you decided that was a trait you were looking for.
It was not.
But
actually, yeah.
You're very fortunate. So I guess I figured some people align easily in some ways, and then they have whatever category that they have different opinions and clash in.
Right. Now, certainly, Jonathan and I do have areas where it's not easy. I mean, every couple does. I do know the worst thing I think anybody could do, and you and I have talked about this, is, if you've got someone that's jumping in and doing a task, for goodness sakes, don't tell them how to do it. Oh, whether they're 10 or 40, it's crippling to someone to just, constantly feel like you need to impart your way into them.
Yeah. I'm like, I'm glad it's getting done, so I'm not gonna say anything. Talking about losing weight, and I just want to apply that to anything. And so if we're talking about food or something else, I'm going to use the word vice because I can't think of anything better. But if you know that your family member or partner needs to do something and you can't control anybody but yourself, what, what can you do on your own that helps you release the control? I don't know. How can you let them figure it out in their own time? So,
Yeah, I mean, that's the question parents ask, spouses ask. I mean, everybody asks. I would be inclined to say quiet is the best way. Just let them figure it out, and, if you will, the natural consequences. But that's one approach. I mean, maybe the best answer I can give is, come up with your own personal way to handle it. But whatever you do, make sure it doesn't lead to that unresolved anger, wherefore there will be bitterness. I mean,
yeah.
bitterness is just a horrible, horrible emotion for anyone to feel for themselves.
Let's pretend that you share your goal with Jonathan and then he can help you achieve it. Have you done that? Have you done sort of a accountability thing with each other?
Right. Actually know of one person who relies very heavily on accountability partners, and it works extremely well for her. But she seeks it out. She asks for it. So again, it would be that it's in their heart to make that change. I've watched several. In fact, one of the most profound statements on that is, it was I don't remember if it was a marriage or a kind of missionary outreach show that Jonathan and I were watching. And at the end, the final question to the person that was leading the whole program, it was like, the most heartbreaking thing about all this time we've spent together is many of you are simply not going to listen and follow through.
Wow. That hits you hard.
Right.
Because if you don't want to change, and if you don't try to build the self-discipline to do it, it's never going to happen. Like, you might be like, yeah, I want things to be better, or I want to stop doing whatever that is. But if you don't want it enough you're not going to do it.
And it doesn't matter what your spouse, what your partner, what the latest and greatest podcast tells you to do, you're not going to do it.
Mm-hmm. Let's say the partner is saying that I need to set a boundary because you're not changing right now, and this isn't working for me. Let's say their relationship is fine, but they're setting a boundary.
So Al-Anon uses the word detachment. You can look that up.
Okay.
You can replace anything within that sort of what detachment is pertaining to abuse, to, whatever. I've done it with my kids. It can be as silly as, the 3-year-old that doesn't put away their socks. You can use that detachment theory. That's amazing. I won't go through all the steps. you can, anybody who you want to listen, or you can incorporate it any way you want. I would say for me to be those tenets of detachment resonate better in my head than all of the boundary books. I mean, there's a ton of boundary books. They're good, they're important, but this detachment approach is remarkable for when people that you love are doing things that are hurting them.
Can you give an example, even if it's the 3-year-old who won't put their socks away? Like, what would you do to detach?
I'm just pulling it up here because I think it's so. I just think it's so clear, and as you know, I really like very practical, very clear.
Mm-hmm. Well, and for anyone who is listening when the show comes out, al-anon is for, it's like AA for the family members or loved ones affected by a person who's addicted, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
So I think these are the most important parts that really resonated with me. Detachment is neither kind nor unkind. And that's when you're a people pleaser, you often perhaps always associate, was I being nice? Were they being nice? They're being so unkind. It's not. It's a state of being. So detachment is neither kind nor unkind. It does not imply judgment or condemnation. We are simply separating ourselves from the adverse effects of another person's, again, blank. For al-anon, it's another person's alcoholism. Mm-hmm. So, if you will, the tenets of it are, we will not suffer because of the actions or reactions of other people. So again, the socks. All right, my kid doesn't have any clean socks. Again, that's the silliest of phrases, but I guess he's going to wear stinky socks, not to allow ourselves to be used or abused by others in the interest of their recovery. And again, this almost sounds ridiculous with socks, but
yeah, you can change it.
But change it however you want. This one's extremely important, not to do for others what they can do for themselves. So maybe let's turn it into the 13-year-old that refuses to do their own laundry and just throws it everywhere. You know what? You don't have any dirty clothes. You go to school. You stink. I don't feel bad about that. We've talked about the laundry is your problem. This is a really interesting one, not to manipulate situations so others will, whatever it is. In this particular case, eat, go to bed, get up, pay the bills. And that does happen, that manipulation. Jonathan and I use the word, trying to manage each other. You can't manage an adult to do what they simply don't want to do. You'll drive yourself crazy.
Yeah. Do you mean
not
manipulating them, like saying, since we're not doing anything, now would be a good time for you to do the laundry, like that?
I think it can be even more, so how you can manage and manipulate the situations. You go out and buy more clothes for the kid because they refuse to do their laundry. You can't stand the fact that they're going to school and they stink. Are you manipulating? Are you creating situations to cover up for their problems?
Okay.
And then the whole, you don't create a crisis and you don't prevent a crisis. So again, I don't know specifically what situations you're referencing, but it's just that whole stop babysitting. Now, if you're talking about a boyfriend, if you're talking about Ian, if you're talking about Jonathan, a spouse, honestly, I'm not even having this conversation, if you will, to that person, like, do your damn laundry and grow up. And it's really driving me crazy, and something's going to have to change. Mm-hmm. I think those types of conversations, when you're talking about an adult, like their clothes are so stinky that the whole family is embarrassed, and this is a 30-year-old. Yeah, I guess I'm at a point in my life, and again, I'm divorced once, so I'm not the person that's going to say, you just need to work through it. Grow up.
Yeah.
Grow up. And if they're not willing to do it, then I would say you need to really. I mean, one alternative I guess I can think of is, all right, you refuse to do this. You're a slob. The house stinks. We cannot control the chaos. And you refuse to do it. I guess you're going to have to get another job, and we're going to pay somebody to come in and do it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think we at one point had a housekeeper, and it wasn't because of that setting, but it's simply at some point, chores become such an emotional burden, far more of an emotional frustration than a physical. And if you make enough money, pay for somebody else to do it, I guess. I mean, that's one unique approach, perhaps.
Yeah, that's my dream. Well, we had really nothing to do with COVID, but I think my topic that I proposed to you about COVID and relationships was it's just as well, because relationship problems were coming out while people were spending more hours together while they were quarantined. And so here's conversation about relationships is useful in quarantine or not.
I guess I would propose exactly that. It has nothing to do with COVID. As Jonathan and I have said, again, pre-COVID and during COVID, we're together 24 hours a day. So there is a rawness, if you will, to being together that much. And if you will, any of the warts there really start to show themselves when you're together constantly.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that COVID has brought on new struggles for people, but I think that comes more from kind of the physical space. He and I experience it, two people working in the same office together, and you're both trying to have a phone call or a meeting, or I don't know, one might have a habit of we don't, but a lot of people, they snap their pen, they talk to themselves. I mean, that kind of stuff, I can totally see where COVID would bring that type of situation on. But
Mm-hmm.
the deep stuff, that was there before. It's just becoming more, relevant because you're together so much.
Thank you so much for agreeing to. I know it's kind of, maybe it's never been done, but you're a brave person, so thanks.
Yeah, no problem at all. Fortunately, with the banking industry, Zoom meetings have become the norm. So I'm probably a little more comfortable with it than people who aren't used to it.
Oh, perfect.
So,
and my first interview, so.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, I've been talking to myself the other times.
All right. Adios.
Adios.